Hi friends, welcome to this latest episode of the Nationalist View. Today we have with us a very special guest, Dr. Sriparna Pathak. Dr. Pathak, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Arunji, for having me here. It's always wonderful to speak with you.
Dr. Pathak is a professor of China Studies and the founding director of the Center for Northeast Asian Studies at Jindal Global University. She also serves in the capacity of the associate director of the Jindal India Institute. She is basically a China expert and she is very well versed in Mandarin also. She has done advanced studies in Beijing and uh, her reports have been featured in various national and international publications. And she has written in 2002, she published a book titled Drifts and Dynamics, Russia's Ukraine War and Northeast Asia. And she's an academic, she's a China expert, and she travels a lot and speaks at a lot of conferences and keeps a very close track of China. And she has featured on our show also earlier with her deep insights. She has been able to traverse through the zigzag of, especially when it comes to China. So there are a lot of smoke screens behind which one needs to have a look at that. Dr. Pathak, my first question is that about this India-China US triangle. So as we are aware, that the US tariff war has hit both India and China, and uh, the recent developments have indicated that India and China are coming much closer in the economic space. However, it's a paradoxical situation because the strategic rivalry is also there. So, how do you see this optics of, I would say, optics of closer economic cooperation and closer ties? Because we know we have just got out of Operation Sindoor, in which it was basically a China's proxy war against us. China was backing Pakistan. And so, how do you look at the new phase of India-China relationship in light of the US tariff war?
Right. Again, very interesting question. And this U.S. tariff war, which was supposed to be with the PRC or with China, but now is with India. Earlier it used to be containing China for all sorts of its malicious activities, but heavens only knows why that it's now looking like it's a contain India strategy. But that being said, there are a lot of these signalings which are going on, and it is being portrayed that New Delhi and Beijing actually might get closer. But these are just optics, and because the prospects for meaningful collaboration are extremely bleak. They are overshadowed by deep-seated strategic rivalries and structural barriers. Yes, there are tariffs on both US and both on India and on China. They've strained both countries' trade relations with the US, and they prompted calls from China for a united front against US's abuse of tariffs and so on. I think a couple of days ago, also the Chinese envoy in New Delhi, speaking at a public event, had mentioned that China supports India against US tariffs. But has India asked for any sort of support? Whatever India does is on its own. So China wants to keep India as the bulletproof jacket so that it doesn't get hurt. Whereas it's trying to project to the global south that it's taking a very firm stance for this fellow global south economy and so on. But here's the thing: there are multiple tariffs and non-tariff barriers against India, even in the PRC. So, but I'll come to that in a bit. The fact is, first and foremost, when we talk about India China, there's a history of border disputes and a history of China constantly attacking India on the borders. There's a huge geopolitical mistrust, and that casts a very long shadow over any potential economic partnership. Um, you know, uh, Disengagement, we are hearing this term constantly, but how far has this engagement really happened? India constantly keeps saying that there also has to be, de-escalation. There is no de-escalation from the PRC, and there is no inclination also for de-escalation. So it's double profit for the PRC, wherein it gets to take over territory also. It gets to project also to the US that it is with India, and at the same time it gets to benefit from the humongous size of the Indian market. There are economic complementarities because there's a bilateral trade, and that reached about $101.7 billion in 2024. But here's the thing: there's a deficit of trade. That's not new. That has existed at least for the last 20 years with all sorts of refusals from the Chinese side to address the trade deficit. India is heavily reliant on Chinese raw material. This reliance, this reliance is for electronics, for APIs, and so on. This time, after Wang Yi's visit, China offered to address, but offered to address is different from agreeing to address. China uses words very carefully. It has said that it will take a look at the issues. This issue is not new. This has been there for the last 20 years. What exactly was going on in the last 20 years that China could not take a look, or it could not offer to take a look, right? Now, China's offered to import more Indian goods to balance the trade. All of this sounds very appealing, but one needs to look beyond what is being projected. There is an overdependence on Chinese supply chains. There are national security risks which make integration contentious, which is why New Delhi has been pushing for strategic autonomy. There are also a lot of domestic political pressures because one does not want to rely on the PRC and extend their influence. So all of these projections are just projections. They don't align India's and China's interest as much as they actually expose the divergent priorities. China wants to rally the global South nations against US unilateralism and wants to leverage its manufacturing dominance and global trade influence. But India is very cautious. India doesn't want to be drawn into China's orbit. Given Beijing's support for Pakistan, including military intelligence, all sorts of support during, the India-Pakistan conflict, which recently happened. India's strategic partnership with the US, despite current tensions, it's critical for countering Chinese regional dominance. Yeah, unfortunately, because of Donald Trump and his terrible tariff tantrums, that's not really happening at the moment. But there are still 28 sectoral partnerships between India and the US. So one should not really forget that China has just tried to use this as an opportunity to further its own goals. There are bullies. The US is acting like a bully, but let's not forget that China has always been a bully. And just because, we now have two bullies, it doesn't need to be that India has to act like a ball when pushed away by the PRC, by China. Let's roll over to the US. When pushed away by the US, let's roll over to the PRC. I don't think that signals a very strong policy then, and I don't think India is in any case doing any of that. All of these are projections. If you look at facts and statistics, in the last 3 to 4 weeks, ever since Trump's tariff tantrums have become much more increased, much more heightened. The thing is, India is actively engaging with Russia. Russia has always been a time-tested friend, and all sorts of agreements or deals are being done with the Russians. It's not with the Chinese. One needs to understand why. All of these projections, Wang Yi coming to India and talks happening and all of that, these are just optics. And why did Wang Yi come to India in the first place? It's not like India was desperate for this, because if it was India's desperation, then the movement would have been from our side. It would have been our leader or our head of state who would have traveled there. But it was Wang Yi who came to India. Also, he said he was coming for the special representative talks, which is a military thing. But he came and he ended up mostly economic things. So I think that should tell us as to who needs who really more. India has always been strategically, has maintained its strategic autonomy, and going to continue doing that. If Wang Yi wants to visit India, okay, Atithi Devo Bhava, sure, why not? But over and above that, nothing much is changing. Wang Yi immediately went to Pakistan after visiting India, and while sitting there, he made the statement that China will always protect Pakistan's interest. The Chinese envoy a day ago, when he was speaking at a public event in New Delhi, also said Pakistan is a victim of terror and there should be regional cooperation. So I think this is more than clear, actually. What sort of relationship does China really want with India? Is India okay with being subservient? I don't think so. Not economically, not politically, not militarily. So, this narrative which is being spread constantly, there's a warming up between India and China. No, I don't think so. It's happening. just one small tidbit which China throws at it, and then the narrative starts getting propelled again. I don't think that's a correct way of looking at things. I don't think it's really objective.
Dr. Pathak, I also want to touch upon this controversy related to the mentioning of the Taiwan issue. So,
Mainstreaming
you
of the
uh, this Taiwan issue.
right,
The
right.
China claimed after this Wang Yi meeting that India has endorsed its Taiwan position, but the Ministry of External Affairs in India denied it. Now, what really happened, and why is primarily why is Beijing, playing out these readout wars?
Beijing, not just Beijing, it's not even just disinformation handles this time. It is the Chinese state, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which went ahead and said that Dr. Jaishankar has said that Taiwan is part of China. But our Ministry of External Affairs has already clarified the position. India has not stated any of that. The second thing is, if you do any sort of OSINT, you will see actually Dr. Jaishankar asking the Chinese, asking Wang Yi that if China can trade with Taiwan, why not India? What exactly is the problem? So, look, disinformation is a very active tool for China for its foreign policy. It would rather keep India and Taiwan divided. It's one of the 5 Ds of disinformation, which tries to divide or create divides between allies. India doesn't prefer using the term ally. We use the term partners or friends because that actually signals more egalitarian footing. But yeah, this sort of disinformation is not something new which China has leveraged to create divides between India and Taiwan. The shocking bit is that over the years, China has become so emboldened that its Ministry of Foreign Affairs now seeks to lie outright, and this is going to just increase. So I think India should also focus on this. During Operation Sindoor, also Chinese handles, and in fact, state-controlled Chinese media as big as Global Times and China Daily had pushed out narratives against India. So this is just going to stay. So look, the rivalry between India and China is a long one. It's not going to go away overnight, and it's not just military or cultural or political. It's actually rooted in the strategic thinking of the PRC. For the PRC, if India has to be kept in check, the best way for it is to keep India tied down to the neighborhood because, as per Chinese strategic thinking, one mountain cannot have two tigers. One Asia cannot have two rising suns. So China will try everything within its limits, be it economically, politically, militarily, digitally, to keep India in check. So that sort of warming up is not going to happen. Unfortunately, India has suffered many times. Let's just hope that we are smart from here on, not to keep falling into the same traps again. This warming up is not really happening. All this projection which is happening, okay, fair enough. That just lies at the level of projection.
Dr. Pathak, my last question is, trustworthiness is a big issue with China, as we all know. And, given the standoff at LSE and China's, Xi Jinping recently visited Tibet also, and the things which they are doing in East Turkestan. So, what are the verifiable steps, which would indicate sincerity in India-China relationship? Because you have rightly said that right now, there are too much of optics and the projections, but the hard reality is probably different. But if we look at, a couple of one or two major steps which China would take, and then uh, we should be, a little more trustworthy about their sincerity. So, what would be those steps? What do you think?
See, trust is limited because, as you correctly said, there's a history of violations. China disregards agreed upon protocols, ones from 1993, 1990. There are so many examples, right? There's also a lot of ambiguity in its agreements because even when, in October 2024, patrolling was discussed, they show divergent interpretations. What is understood by the world is understood completely differently and purposely by the PRC, right? That's the thing. Then there's infrastructure build-up. The China is constructing a permanent military infrastructure, bunkers, hardened shelters near Pangong So and other LSE areas. There are lots of strategic motives, and there's a complete lack of transparency. China simply refuses to provide clear details on agreements. as seen as in the vague statements like the 2024 Pact and so on. So India is right in being distrustful of the PRC and not being a lackey of the PRC. I think our self respect teaches us enough not to be a lackey of any country, be it of the US or of the Chinese. What would be the verifiable steps? China is not going to do it. But since this is a question, I'm just going to mention them. One is complete disengagement at all friction points. China has to withdraw troops and dismantle temporary and permanent structures like tents and bunkers at all friction points, including Depsang plains and Demchok, and has to restore Indian access to all 65 petroleum points, particularly petroleum points 10 to 13, which have been blocked since 2020. Our MEA has stated this multiple times. Dr. Jayashankar has stated this multiple times, but it's simply not happening. If China wants trust, it wants to really build trust, then sure, get out of India's sovereignty. First is that. Then there has to be a verification through joint, ground and aerial surveys, because that is what was outlined in the 2024 agreement. China will very preferably have amnesia about these sorts of things. But if it really wants to indicate sincerity, then China needs to do all of this. Second, restore the pre 2020 status quo. China needs to restore the LSE to its April 2020 alignment in areas like Depsang, where it has shifted the LSE westwards. And how do we verify it? Again, India needs to use high resolution satellite imagery, drone surveillance to confirm the removal of Chinese infrastructure and troop withdrawal. Third is China needs to adhere to building measures. It should follow existing CBMs, such as those from 1993 and 1996, which prohibit unilateral changes to the LAC and they mandate prior notification of military exercises. China doesn't adhere to any of them. I'm talking about agreements from 1993. So that's another thing. Then it has to show a commitment to a formal boundary agreement. So if that could happen, then again, great. Even in terms, Wang Yi also made a lot of these rosy statements, and we saw the true face of China yet all over again this as soon as he landed in Pakistan. But here's the thing: if China really wants to have trust, it should demonstrate goodwill by easing trade restrictions. It should lift the curbs that exist on Indian pharmaceuticals or IT services. They have said they will look into, exporting digging or drilling machines. Let's say if that really happens, because China says a lot of things, they never really happen. Also, they've said they'll look into it. So my expectations are really low, but let's look at that. They also said that, yeah, they'll try to address India's concerns on rare earth metals. Okay, sure enough. Let's see how far that goes. Optics are optics. China does a lot of optics, and unfortunately, democracies, including India very easily actually fall into these optics. So, China really wants to build trust, it needs to do all of these. And how do we verify? India needs to track changes in trade balances, in market access, and China's voting patterns in international bodies, because China also would want to keep India out of key positions in the international arena. Look, unfortunately, I don't think China would do any of this to build trust. It gives out a lot of these rosy narratives because it's used to doing that. And unfortunately, most Indians fall, agree to it and easily fall prey to it. They're easily fooled. That really works to China's advantage. Maybe it has a very good way of projecting or putting out these narratives, or maybe we are just about too naive and we refuse to learn from history. But I hope that from here on we learn from history. The possibilities of actual cooperation are very low. India will cooperate with Russia, which is a time tested friend. Again, with Japan, Prime Minister Modi is going to China for the SCO summit. But look, again, here's what I want to reiterate, that it's the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and India got the membership of the SCO only because of Russia. So, given that Russia commands an important place in the SCO, the SEO is important to India. So it's not because of China. So we will cooperate, we will engage within all these regional groupings and so on. We will leverage all the potential benefits of trade which come up in these expanded memberships of groupings such as SCO or BRICS or so on. But I think India should really be careful, because if the cooperation had to happen, it would have happened from 1947 onwards. But the fact is, it's not yet happened. And I don't think we need more evidence. So I'll rest my case here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Pathak. And I think, but you have rightly pointed out that, all that glitters is not gold. So currently, unfortunately, the problem is that being part of the media, I understand the Indian media has a tendency of swinging from, one extreme to another. So at one point of time, they were absolutely anti-China, and now they are going gaga over the so-called, Chinese moves to come closer to India or the India-China relationship. So I think there has to be a sense of proportion in terms of, understanding these complex situations, which you have brought out very, clearly and absolutely lucidly. So thank you so much. And we'll be back again soon, viewers. And we'll continue to track China with Dr. Pathak and other experts because that's one of our favorite subjects. So and thank you so much, Dr. Pathak, for taking time out from your busy schedule. Thank you.
Thank you.